Another edition of Riding Home here on Dog Post. Dean Legge and Matt DeBary. Let's talk about something that a lot of people like to write about, Matt, which is comparing the first 5 years of Kirby Smart to the first 5 years of Mark Richt. I get the feeling we're going to be doing this for 15 years, it feels like. But we're going to go through year by year and talk about comparing them. Now, I don't have a bias necessarily. Dog Post was started right when Mark Richt got to Georgia, so I have a lot of good things to say about Mark Richt. But at the end of the day, I think the numbers will bear out that Kirby has done a better job through his first 5 years. But let's let the numbers speak for themselves. All right, Matt, we've got the first year. Georgia goes 8-4 in 2001 with a win over Tennessee. Now that was a big deal win on Rocky Top. And they finished the season ranked number 22 in the AP poll. Georgia in 2016 went 8-5, playing that additional game at that stage, and did not finish ranked. So your thoughts, your memories comparing 2016 to 2001.
Well, I remember in 2001, there was a lot of excitement around the program and the team. Mark Richt was a hot offensive coordinator from FSU, and you had a young quarterback who you knew, even as early on, that he could be pretty good. Now, it was David Green. Obviously, we saw what he would do the next 3 years, but there was a lot of talent still on that team. Randy McMichael would play a long time in the NFL. He was on that team. Plenty of others. But they were kind of a fun team to watch here and there. You saw a lot of promise from them. And obviously the big win against Tennessee was huge. That was a win they needed early on. And Rick was winning a lot of big games on the road, too. He was having a lot of success early on the road. So there was a lot to be excited about if you were a Georgia fan early on in the Rick days. And I just want to say everyone loves comparing those two, like you said. And when it happens, it kind of feels like a derogatory thing for Kirby Smart because we know what Mark Richt did and he never won a national title, but they were both really, really good coaches for their first 5 years. So if Kirby Smart is keeping up with Mark Richt through the first 5 years, that's a pretty good job because I do think the next 10 years could be on that same trajectory where, as we know with Mark Richt, kind of went up and down a little bit after those first 5 years. But early on, in 2001, it did look like Georgia could be a very good team, and they were.
Yeah, there's no question that 01 team. We remember that team for winning in Knoxville. They were 2-3 against ranked teams. The 2016 team was 2-3 against ranked teams. Both teams lost to Florida their first year. Mark Richt and company beat Georgia Tech in Atlanta, which was a big deal, let me tell you. Kirby and them lost in Athens, which was a big deal. The win over number 8 Auburn was not as shocking as Georgia's win over Tennessee, but I'm here to tell you that that was a hugely important game for Georgia. That set the tone in 2016. The way that the Tech game, in many ways, moved forward and solidified the win over Tennessee in 2001. So both years, ended with losses they wouldn't have liked. I mean, the Boston College loss in the bowl game, yeah, people were not enthused about that. Let me tell you, I was at that game on the field. That was not a great moment for Mark Richt, but I don't want to bury the lead. So they both with 8-win seasons to start. 2000 to start their first years. Now, in 2000, and both of them with their second years just really exploded, Matt.
Mm-hmm. The 02 team was so fun to watch. Probably the second best team in the last 21 years, especially on defense. They were just suffocating teams, and they had their big moment too early on against Alabama. Then at the end against Auburn, one of the biggest games in Georgia history, one of the biggest wins. But offensively, they really started clicking towards the end of that year, just destroyed Georgia Tech 55-7, something like that, 51-7.
Yeah, 51.
And then put it on Arkansas in the SEC championship. Musa Smith was running wild on guys towards the end of that year. You still had Fred Gibson, Reggie Brown, Terrence Edwards was still on that 02 team. Very, very fun to watch, very similar to 2017. And a lot of those guys came back from 2016. You had the senior leadership, the two running backs. We know all about that. But it was clear both coaches had a big change from year one to year two. And two of the best teams that we've seen in the past 20 years were the second year of both of these coaches.
So I'll tell you this: the 2017 team was better than the 2002
Yeah.
team, and there's a couple of reasons why. When you look at the 02, first of all, the 17 team just killed everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, like after the Notre Dame game, they did not have a competitive game until they played Auburn in November. And that included the Mississippi State game at home that a lot of people thought they would lose. The 2002 team, the game against Clemson was tight. Those two teams at that moment, we didn't know Clemson was not good. But Georgia was, and you sure couldn't tell after that game. And then they had to save themselves against South Carolina. I thought they were going to lose that game at the end.
Yeah.
And then they settled down with sort of wins over meaningless teams before going to Alabama, the hottest October game I think I've ever been to in my life, so muggy. That was a huge win. And then a week later, a huge win against Tennessee that didn't even have a quarterback. But these were wins with their defense. Yeah. That's by the game going into the Florida weekend. Georgia was 7-0, I think. 8-0 going into Jacksonville, and just lost an inexplicable game to the Gators. The Georgia team in 17, besides the Notre Dame 1-point win, won by, and this is very quick math, 21-1, 28, 28, 41, 34, something by a lot against Missouri, 35 against the Gators, and then 14 against Carolina. I mean, and then they beat Kentucky by looking like 28, 31 against Tech. They beat Auburn's brains in the SEC championship game, which of course gave them the berth into the college football playoff. The 02 team was about not getting the chance. The 17 team got a chance and just lost in the last play of the game.
Yeah, I will say that both of those teams were very good on special teams.
They really were.
Georgia's best teams are the ones where they have a great special teams unit to go along with the other two parts of the game. But very, very good teams, and I think a little disappointment in both 03 and 18 after that 02 and 17 team.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. You know, the 3 team coming into the season, you know, they straight off the bat they played Clemson, and at that stage, you know, everybody kind of knew that Clemson was not not in the ballpark of Georgia at the time. A 30-0 win, Fred Gibson, easy. You know, it was. I think it was 16-0 in the third, or
that was a hot game too.
It was blazing hot. That was in the 90s.
Was a hot game.
Yeah, that was bad.
I think players on both teams were throwing up all over the place. If I remember that game right.
I don't remember the throw ups. I remember Clemson couldn't move the ball to save their life. Charlie Whitehurst and company. And that was a really, 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 really good Georgia defense. That might have been their best defense while Mark was there. I mean, they couldn't score, but they could play defense. The 02 team was really good on defense, Matt, but that 03 team was really good on defense, man.
Well, they ran into LSU twice, and that was not...
Yeah, I was about to start talking about that, but I did want to go back to the 18 team. You know, that 18 team, they were really good, and they were killing people and all this stuff, and then they ran into LSU in Baton Rouge. Both teams suffer in their first loss in Baton Rouge. The difference was the 03 team lost on the last play of the game. The 18 team just kind of fell apart in the second half and never got it going offensively.
Nope.
But both teams combined to score 26 points in Baton Rouge, and that's a tough place to play when LSU is good. And in both cases, LSU was good. And then they kind of made their way through the season. Although I have to say, the 18 team defeated 2 teams that were ranked in the top 11. That game against Florida, which turned out to be a 19-point win, that was a huge win for Georgia. I mean, there was a lot of discussion about Dan Mullen and sort of the stupidity that goes along with anytime you talk about how Dan Mullen's going to jump over Kirby Smart, having never beaten him. That was in full force, and I don't know if they pulled away from Florida so much as they throttled them in the second half.
I would say the 18 team was better than the 03 team because 18 they
Yeah.
were one of the best teams in the country.
Yeah.
Should have beat Alabama in the SEC title game and had a very real chance of being in the playoff in that Final Four. 03 was really good, but I don't think they were a top 5 team in the country at the end of the year.
No.
Um, but yeah, LSU was just a coincidence there. But 03 was again very very talented, and I thought had a lot of potential. LSU was the better team that year, but it's still an outstanding team. But 18 they beat Florida,
Yes.
and then 03 they didn't. That was another big
Well,
one.
the other thing too is the Florida loss in 03 was just such a bizarre loss. I mean, you're talking about at the time the number 4 team in the country playing a team that was barely ranked in Florida. And, if you want to put the same thing about Georgia's loss in the Sugar Bowl to Texas as the Florida loss, I mean, I don't know that I would say that's the same thing at all. But the 18 team was probably better than the 3 team. The problem with the 03 team was they couldn't score, Matt. I mean, they only scored over 30 a few times. And in the SEC, it looks like they only did it, against teams that were not great. I mean, they had to survive against UAB.
Yeah, I'm a big Musa Smith guy too. He left as a junior right after 02.
Yeah.
I think they were leaning on freshman Craig Lumpkin, a 5-star, good player, but they really could have used Musa Smith coming back in 03. But that made the 04 win against Florida that much bigger. That was one of the biggest games I remember watching as a kid. They had to get over Florida after losing to them in 02 and 03 like that. And they did. And, of course, they beat Florida again in 19. But 04 was a fun team to watch as well.
Well, 04 came into the season. Both the teams came in as the number 3 teams in the country. And both of them worked their way through the start of the season before having really huge matchups in Sanford Stadium. And the 4 team hosted Nick Saban and LSU and beat their brains in. I mean,
I was at that game. That was one of the loudest I've ever heard Sanford Stadium. That was a game for the ages. If you were there, you don't forget it. And then they drop a complete egg the next week. I mean, I thought they were going to blow Tennessee out of the water after what they just did to LSU. And that was a loss to remember.
You never could trust those teams to do what they were supposed to do when they needed to do it. I mean, the 19 team had the just completely bizarre loss to South Carolina at home in double overtime. That was strange.
But 04 had 2 of those. Because they lost to South Carolina, right?
No, they did not. They lost to an Auburn team that was way better than they were. And again, they had a hard time scoring. They only allowed 24 points in that game. I'm just looking really quickly here. I don't see a game. I see 2 games in conference play where Georgia allowed more than 20 points in the 2014 season. I don't want to skip this. The 2 really, the 19 team had Matt 3 top 10 wins. A win over Notre Dame, a win over number 6 Florida, and a win over number 7 Baylor. And frankly, those weren't aberration. Those were good teams. Notre Dame was good. Florida went on to win the Orange Bowl. Notre Dame lost. Who did Notre Dame? Notre Dame beat Iowa State in the Citrus Bowl, and then Baylor, of course, was in the Sugar Bowl. They also beat Georgia. Also beat Auburn. Georgia did not fall out of the top 10 the entire 2019 season. So you barely dropped out in the 4th season. That 4 team was good. I think maybe they were better than the 19 team. I'm not sure.
04 again was a good team. They dropped the ball.
I'm sorry, Matt. 04 was having to save themselves against Georgia Tech at the end of the year. I mean, that was.
Yeah, I felt like there was so much talent on that team that would go on to play in the NFL. It was the final year of Pollock and David Green and Fred Gibson, I believe, and Reggie Brown. It was a lot of guys. I felt like that should have been a really, really good team, and it was. I think they would beat the 19 team, who I felt,
I don't know.
although with those big wins, they just played ugly a lot of the time. Jake Fromm really fell off towards the end. I don't know how much he would do against that 14 defense.
Yes, that is the
Or
biggest
04 defense, yeah.
So, but I mean, like, the numbers don't lie. I mean, that Notre Dame team was good. They beat them, a top 10 team, top 10 Florida. That Auburn team was number 12 in the country, and then of course they beat Baylor. Their only loss to a ranked team was against number 2 LSU, which was, people would say, in theory, Matt, the best college football team of all time. So I don't know. That Auburn team in 04 probably should have played for the national championship, and they did not.
Right, but
and one other thing too,
yeah.
the 4 team didn't win the division.
Yeah.
I mean, it just can't happen with that much skill and talent and so forth that they did have.
So after 4 years, Richt's program and Kirby's program are still kind of right there neck and neck. But at this point, I would still say that Kirby has had the program a little bit higher after 4 years. Right. And then obviously we had this past year. And it's tough to compare that because the 04 to 05 was completely different. Quarterback change. You had a lot going on. And then, of course, we had COVID this year and all the quarterback controversy going on. If there was no COVID, that's which is crazy to say. Who knows what this Georgia 2020 team could have been. But at the end of the day, neither has a national championship yet. But both were knocking on the door very, very hard. But if you're comparing them through the first 4 or 5 years, yeah, I mean
are we not going to talk about 5 and 20 in detail? We should. We really should.
We can. Yeah, we can. Yeah.
So the 5 team, that game against Boise to start the season was a big deal for a lot of different reasons, and Georgia absolutely destroyed them. A week later, had to hold on against South Carolina, had a couple wins, and then went to Tennessee. This really was one of Mark's best wins at Georgia. Was the win as the number 5 team against number 8 Tennessee on the road. Tennessee spiraled out of control after that. Just period. They won the East in 2007, but from that point forward, they really kind of were not the same as a program from that game on. But the thing about the 5 team and the 20 team that they have in common is that we don't know what could have been with quarterback situations. I mean, Georgia lost to Florida with Joe Tereshinski as the quarterback. I don't even know if he had 100 yards passing, Matt.
Yeah, I think he caught a touchdown pass.
He did, from Thomas Brown.
In that game, yep. It was a wild game, and every once in a while you'll have one of those in Jacksonville. But they did win the East in 05. DJ Shockley had the year that Georgia fans will forever, remember and think fondly of. He had his moment.
They had to save themselves against Georgia Tech too. DJ
Brian McClendon
with Brian McClendon,
the big touchdown,
who nearly took me out in the end zone on that play. But I don't want to skip. Go ahead.
That was Tim Jennings with the interception at the end. And that was a lot of talent on that team too.
Yeah.
And they should have finished the season off right, beating West Virginia.
Well, the thing about it is that the LSU game was probably Mark's best game overall, like ever. I mean, you're talking about an LSU team that certainly had an argument to play for the national championship that year, and they lost.
Marcus Russell,
they lost by 20 points to Georgia in Atlanta. But speaking of national championship, I mean, Georgia 4-2 in 2020 against ranked teams. 2 losses to top 10 teams, 2 wins. It's just so hard to judge the 2020 team because of the not necessarily COVID, but more quarterback than anything. I mean, when you look at their best game that they played before JT Daniels got there was the Auburn game, a 21-point win over Auburn. From that point forward, they really struggled. I mean, they did not play well against Tennessee, but won by 24. They got beat by Alabama by 17. They had to hold on against Kentucky to win by 11. They got beat by Florida by 22, 24, whatever it is. And then they started scoring 31, 45, 49, and then finally struggled against Cincinnati So they closed their year with a win in a major bowl game. I don't know. I think probably the 5 team would win that game. I mean, it would depend on who the quarterbacks were, plural, in for both teams.
Yeah.
But that in all of these scenarios, maybe 0-1 being different, I would take Kirby's teams almost every single time. I don't think, though, that the 20 team, I just don't think they'd beat the 05 team. I don't know.
I don't know how they would deal with Leonard Pope, who was a freak at the time in 04 and 05. I think DJ Shockley would give them some problems. Thomas Brown was running hard. He's going to get some tough yards. The 20 defense is faster, so I think they would cause some issues there. But it would be a fun one to watch. And again, if JT Daniels is the quarterback, you know what? I probably would take
I might
20,
take the 20 at that stage. But
yeah.
But DJ was a heck of a player, and was the type. I mean, if they could get DJ Shockley right now at Georgia, they would love to have DJ Shockley right now.
I would love to watch Tim Jennings against Pickens, DeMario Mentor,
they had a great
against those guys
secondary.
like that.
Great blue.
The defense was loaded. The more and more I think about it.
Well, the line. I wonder
could the linebackers?
Could the linebackers? Yeah, because you still at that stage you had Kedrick Golston,
Sullivan.
Excuse me,
Jonathan Sullivan.
Sullivan was gone. No.
Okay, yeah.
You had Quentin Moses.
Yep.
Guys like that. Kedrick Golston was just a damn warrior. You know, that guy he would fight you. And he was extremely.
He was a
nice.
Dog. That's what they called him.
He was a damn dog for sure. And they had lost, David Pollock and David Green, and I'll tell you right now, I remember the summer thinking these guys aren't going to do anything because they lost so much. But you had guys like Max Gene Gillis and Greg Blue.
Sean Bailey came alive.
But it was the connection between Shock, DeBary Mentor, and Tim Jennings. That trio was really close, and you had some seriously high character guys on there like Thomas Brown and DJ. I mean, that was Keelan Johnson's younger time, but I think the 5 team on the whole would probably beat the 20 team. Kirby's teams, though, man, they're so stingy. They just don't allow much of anything, Matt. That's the problem when you start comparing his teams. I do want to say, though, when you look at Kirby's time at Georgia, it's just been better, generally speaking. There's only been one curious loss, which was the South Carolina. I mean, the Carolina loss didn't make any sense to anybody. Yeah. You had about one of those a year with Mark. And, it was better back then in terms of how, the media and just the atmosphere around the program wasn't as, like they were curing cancer. Like it seems like sometimes they feel like they are now. I mean, this is still just football. But football matters a lot more now than it did then, too. I mean, I've been going through numbers, people watching programs. College football is more popular than it's ever been. And the league changed. And people are trying to compare these two. The first 5 years, if Kirby can replicate Mark's first 5 years every 5 years, they'll win the national championship multiple times because the situation's different.
Does the way they lose matter in the way people perceive? So. I would say Kirby's losses have been more heartbreaking.
You think?
Than Richt's. I think Richt dropped, like you said, dropped more games than he probably should have had.
But Mark was. I mean, can you remember a time? I know you were a lot younger, but can you remember a time where Georgia would really compete with USC or Miami at the time?
Not in the early 2000s, no.
Right. So maybe the 02 team. I think maybe the 02 team.
But again, you have to beat Florida. The great teams would have beaten Florida there, and they didn't. But Kirby's losses have been the strange one to South Carolina. They've been blown out, but then they've had the 2 heartbreaking, kind of blowing the lead type of losses, which might sting more than anything against Alabama, where Richt had some bad losses. 2012 SEC title game, farther along in his career, but he didn't have a ton of really heartbreaking, stab you in the heart type of losses in the first 5 years, except maybe the '04 Tennessee loss. That was
Well,
pretty bad.
think about this though, and this is going completely off memory. I guess I should really not do it this way. I should not go off memory. But the losses in 16. In 16 you lose to Tennessee on the last play of the game. You lose
That was the first game I covered.
the 1 point loss to Vanderbilt, a 1 point loss to Georgia Tech. In 17, they got blown out by Auburn. They lose on the last play of the game to Alabama. In 18, they get beat solidly by LSU, lose on the last play of the game to Alabama, lose by a touchdown to Texas. 19, again, a bizarre loss to South Carolina on the last play of the game, and they get beat solidly by LSU. They lose solidly to Alabama, solidly to Florida. So 3 of their last 4 losses have been to top 10 teams. 5 of their last, 6 of their last 7 losses, and I can just keep going back. 7 of their last 9, losses have been to ranked teams, the bulk of which have been in the top 10. The program competes on a different level than it did now than it did then, Matt. And I think it is an easy discussion to talk about. But you certainly cannot compare 2011 to 2015 versus 2016 to 2020. Those are not even close. And they won the division twice in that time, but they didn't win the conference. They didn't play in Sugar Bowls. It just wasn't as good. And that's why they made the move to Kirby.
In 06, we saw Florida take over Georgia as the kings of the East, and they kind of were very, very good. Obviously won 2 national titles. I don't think there's a team right now who's overtaking Kirby in year 6 like Florida took over the East in year 6 of Mark Richt too.
And that's what you saw. I mean, Nick left the league and went to the NFL, took Kirby with him. And then they both wound up at Alabama the year after 2 years after Urban Meyer was in Gainesville. Well, I mean, the league changed dramatically. And not only that, LSU kept rolling with Les Miles for an extended period of time. Auburn with Tommy Tuberville made the change to Gene Chiswick, got hot in 2010, won the national championship. I mean, everybody has figured out a way to do it except Georgia in that period of time. Well, Tennessee certainly has not. But the league changed. And, Mark did a heck of a job for a long time, but by the time the end came around, and at that moment, I didn't think that was the right call. But it didn't take me long to realize that it was the right call. You cannot have years where you're struggling to beat Georgia Tech. Not at Georgia.
And not anymore. I mean, no. Georgia Tech used to be a respectable program. I mean, they used to be.
When they were a respectable program, they were a respectable program. Yeah. When they become that again, they'll become that again. But the last however many years, I don't even know how long, they really haven't.
Georgia and Kirby shouldn't lose to Georgia Tech for the foreseeable future. Shouldn't lose to Tennessee or South Carolina for the foreseeable future. Who
could you say that about in the pantheon of Georgia coaches? I mean, Ray Goff, Georgia Tech was legit. Yeah. And, of course, that was a different time. But,
Tennessee used to be a big win. Now it's expected to beat them by 20
Tennessee
points.
was as monumental a win as you could get in the 90s for a lot of teams. And, Georgia could not beat Tennessee at the time. And I can't remember. I mean, the last time Tennessee beat Georgia was in 16. But this century, it's been a disaster for them. And that was because of what? Of Mark Richt. Yeah. I mean, Mark totally... Another thing people don't understand, I mean, the appreciation for Mark Richt is not going to change anytime soon because 3 things changed when he got to Georgia. He switched the Tennessee game, the Tech rivalry, and the Auburn rivalry. Those 3 games, Georgia was having a hard time winning. And from that point forward, those changed. And the focus became Florida. Why? Because Florida, not just because of the 90s, but because of what they did with Urban for a time there. People were going crazy. And then you've seen since that Georgia's really had their way with Florida.
Auburn and Tennessee.
Well, certainly in Auburn and Tennessee. I mean, Auburn
took the reins from Rick as it relates to beating Tennessee and Auburn. And again, Kirby should be undefeated against Tennessee. The Hail Mary's the Hail Mary. It happens, but I mean they had the game won. But and I would go. I'd probably guess that Kirby has a better win-loss record against top 25
Oh
teams and
yeah.
against top 10
Yes.
teams. So, but those Richt teams were very, very good. Now
They
they were
really
up and
were.
down the rest of the way the next 10 years, but those
Yeah,
first
I mean
5 years were really
from
good.
6 on, from 6 to 11, it was there were frustrating moments. I mean, in 6, you had the confusion of the beginning of the season, no quarterback to really understand or lean on. But then they started surging once Matthew got in there, and from the end of 6 to the Alabama game in 8, they were as good as anybody in the country. They just didn't string it together in a season. That was their problem. And then after 8 was a disappointment because they did not win the national championship, didn't even win the division. And then 9, 10, the pressure was on in 11, and those 11 and 12 teams were good. They just weren't top 5 teams in the country. Well, the 12 team was. And
Yeah.
the 12 team should have played for the national championship, but that's another story for another
Well, they
day.
did. They played it in Atlanta
And
against
then you had
Alabama.
13 and 14. I mean, y'all, I just don't see in the near future that Kirby's teams are going to go from top 5 to 17. Like, they're not going to fall off like that. Not the way
I,
that it's been.
I can't see Georgia ever falling out of the top 25 anytime
And
soon.
and
I
that
mean,
happened.
I
That
couldn't imagine.
happened.
Yeah.
That was something, that happened a lot during Mark. I mean, when Mark got it going, they were really good. But there were a lot of blanks for a while. And they're just, Georgia, Oklahoma, LSU, Alabama, Clemson, probably that group.
Yeah.
They're just not going to be out of the top 15. I mean, if
My overall thoughts, if you're comparing the two coaches in the first 5 years, I'm looking at it and saying Kirby's done a good job. That's what I'm saying. If you compare them the next 5 years and they're still pretty similar,
that's a
then
problem.
that's a problem.
Yeah, because everything has changed and the resources now are different than they used to be. And what Kirby's working with, because he's demanded it, he's working with more.
Yeah.
So yeah, if they go through a time like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, where they have a losing season,
Yeah.
an 8-win season, another 9-win season, that's not going to work. And the pressure will reflect that over time. So you've got Kirby slightly over Mark this first 5 years.
Yes.
Do you think it's crazy to compare them?
No, I don't think it's crazy at all. Because that's what we do. And again, Mark Richt was there for 15 years for reasons, because the first 5 were really good, and he showed that here and there later on. But I think, again, they played for a national championship. They were knocking on the door. But you look at the first 5 years, I think Kirby Smart has done a really nice job. He just hasn't got that national championship yet. I think most people thought he probably would after 5 years, but it might be coming soon. But I think the trajectory of the program has a big green arrow going up, where Mark Richt didn't after 5 years. So if we're comparing them 5 years later and the numbers are still the same, then we have a problem. But after 5 years, I think it's perfectly fine right now.
There's been no off years for Kirby.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, if you want to hear more about this, go to dogpost.com. We'll see you over on the website.